In March 2021, the 14th United Nations Congress on Crime Prevention and Criminal Justice, the Kyoto Congress, is taking place. This is the United Nations' largest conference in the field of crime prevention and criminal justice, held once every 5 years. Since the first Congress held in Geneva in 1955, it has been held in major cities around the world. In 2015, at the Doha Congress, it was endorsed that Japan will host the next Congress in 2020. At the Doha Congress, Ms. Yoko Kamikawa, the Justice Minister, delivered a welcome message to all the participants.
And it will also be the year of the Olympic and Paralympic Games in Tokyo. I would like to express my sincere appreciation to the member states for entrusting Japan to host the next Crime Congress on such a memorial occasion.
Japan has continued its efforts to create a safe and secure society. It's been half a century since the fourth Congress was held in Kyoto in 1970. So let's look back in time to see how our criminal justice system developed, along with the development of our society. About 150 years ago, Japan set about its modernization and has developed its transportation, communication, and industry modeled on Western civilization. In the field of criminal justice, it was also modernized by enacting the Penal Code and the Code of Criminal Procedure based on French and German laws. Time has passed, and after the Second World War, Japan rebuilt its devastated land with unremitted effort and recovered in the 1950s to celebrate the period of high economic growth. The Japanese Constitution, promulgated in 1946 with 10 provisions concerning the protection of human rights in criminal justice, changed the system significantly. The Code of Criminal Procedure was also revised significantly under the influence of American laws. In 1970, as society and the economy became stable after 100 years had passed since the beginning of Japan's modernization, Osaka hosted the first World Expo in Asia. At the World Expo, the cutting-edge technologies at the time were showcased under the theme Progress in Science and Technology. In the same year, the Fourth UN Congress was held in Kyoto. Following the Tokyo Olympics in 1964, these events raised Japan's profile as one of the world's developed countries. This was the first Crime Congress held in Asia, and representatives of 85 member states participated. The theme was crime and development. Member states were called on to take effective steps to coordinate and intensify their crime prevention efforts within the context of economic and social development. During the post-war period in Japan, policies that prioritized economic growth gave rise to nationwide pollution, which became a major social problem. To address such a situation, in addition to corporate efforts and administrative initiatives, criminal laws were enacted to regulate pollution. At the same time, new political and social systems developed after the war, which led to social and ideological conflict among the people in Japan. Influenced by the Cold War, groups of radicalists and extremists caused the so-called public security incidents. Those who had become even more radicalized and extreme committed serious, brutal offenses that included riots and hijackings. In response to such situations, Japan has taken legislative measures. Laws were enacted to regulate the use of Molotov cocktails. And the Act on the Punishment of Unlawful Seizure of Aircraft and other legislation was enacted to penalize hijacking. At the time, bribery cases increased, which fueled public frustration against structural corruption. In 1976, the Lockheed Incident, the largest post-war corruption case that led to the arrest of a former prime minister, occurred. The Penal Code was revised to address such situations, including increasing statutory penalties for bribery and other forms of corruption. This not only enabled appropriate sentencing for large-scale corruption, but was also expected to have a general deterrence effect. In the 1980s, Japan became one of the leading economies in the world, for example, by ranking first in the world for the number of cars produced. In the latter half of the 1980s, stocks and land prices soared beyond the pace of economic growth, resulting in the so-called bubble economy. The development of science and technology changed people's lifestyles and living environment. Under such circumstances, new types of crimes emerged as the new social problem, the misuse of computers. In 1981, an online banking system was exploited to commit wire fraud, resulting in damages of 130 million yen. To address such misuse of computers, in 1987, the Penal Code was revised, including new offenses to penalize computer fraud. These legislations enabled adequate responses against computer-related crimes. There was also a series of corruption incidents known as the Nenshikoren scandal and the Recruit scandal, and in 1992, the Political Funds Control Act was revised. The Showa era ended, and we moved on to the Heisei era. On January 7, 1989, upon the demise of His late Majesty, the name of the new era, Heisei, was announced. In November 1989, the Berlin Wall, symbol of the Cold War between the East and the West, was taken down. The Malta Summit declared an end to the Cold War of 44 years between the East and the West.
(1989), the first year of the Heisei edition of the White Paper on Crime, outlined the crime situation and criminal justice approaches of the Showa era. Looking at the number of penal code offenses, the number temporarily increased during the post-war turmoil, but after this short period, the numbers either decreased or remained stable for many years and then started to rise from 1975. However, the clearance rate remained constantly high throughout the years. As a result, Japan was described as one of the safest countries in the world. The contributing factors can be explained as follows: the law-abiding character of the people, a high standard of education, effective police activities, and the effective functioning of criminal justice institutions.
During the 30 years of the Heisei era from 1989, various reforms in crime prevention and criminal justice were undertaken. The revision of the Penal Code and the prison law was also carried out, an issue since the Showa era. Going into the 1990s, the stock prices and the markets crashed, leading to the collapse of the bubble economy. The Japanese economy plunged into a prolonged slump known as the Lost Decade. Numerous banks went bankrupt, and illegal compensation by major securities firms became a social problem. There were also devastating natural disasters. The Great Hanshin Awaji earthquake occurred on January 17, 1995, with more than 6,000 casualties. Two months after the earthquake, the Tokyo subway sarin gas attack occurred in the capital of Japan. This was one of the many heinous crimes committed by the Aum Shinrikyo cult. In the 1990s, there was a strong call for measures against such heinous crimes, as well as against drugs and firearms trafficking committed by criminal organizations. This resulted in legislation for wiretapping operations and provisions to penalize money laundering in relation to drug offenses. On September 11, 2001, terrorist attacks on the United States occurred. Given this situation, legislative measures were taken to conclude international conventions on terrorism prevention, and various measures were taken to cope with globalization. The war against terrorism still continues worldwide. Turning to the situation in Japan during the 2000s, economic disparity became a social issue. Public safety was challenged in various ways, including by the increase of illegal foreign residents. Against this background, the number of reported penal code offenses began to rise dramatically from 1996, and it exceeded 2.8 million cases in 2002, setting the record for the post-war era. During the 2000s, in response to such a situation, the government, the public and private sector, and local communities joined forces to promote various crime prevention initiatives. And in the field of criminal justice, a number of major reforms were implemented. In 2003, the ministerial meeting concerning measures against crime was convened, and for the first time after the war, effective crime prevention measures were explored in government-wide discussion. In the field of corrections, acting on the recommendations of the 2003 Correctional Administration Reform Council, the prison law was fully revised in 2007 for the first time in about 100 years. This new act ensured transparency of prison administrations, improved treatment of sentenced persons for their reintegration, and enhanced outside communication. This was in observance of the UN Standard Minimum Rules for the treatment of prisoners. As the crime situation worsened, prison overcrowding, where the number of inmates exceeded the capacity of the prisons, continued. To address this situation, in 2007, in line with regulatory and other reforms at the time, Japan's first private finance institution prison, the Mine Rehabilitation Program Center, commenced its operation. In the field of community-based treatment, based on the recommendations of the Offender Rehabilitation Expert Council in 2006, the Offender Rehabilitation Act was enacted in 2008. Conditions in probation and parole were organized and enhanced with this act. It also improved community-based treatment, including the introduction of specialized treatment programs. Community volunteers, including volunteer probation officers and the government, created an effective public-private collaboration mechanism to further strengthen support for offender rehabilitation. Various measures have also been taken to prevent reoffending. In 2016, the Act for the Prevention of Recidivism was enacted and enforced. Government-wide initiatives in cooperation with the local governments and the private sector are actively being implemented. There was also major progress in terms of justice system reform. Justice system reform was guided by these principles. Develop a civil criminal justice system that meets the expectation of the public. Reform training in the legal profession that supports the justice system. And establish a popular base for the justice system through public participation. 24 new legislations were enacted. Reform started to progress significantly. To promote public participation, the Saibang-in system was implemented in 2009. This is a unique system of Japan, which is modeled upon the jury systems and lay judge systems of foreign countries. In 2016, the Code of Criminal Procedure was revised to meet the needs of the times. Audiovisual recording of investigative questionings and the prosecutorial agreement system were both introduced. To enhance protection of crime victims, the Basic Act on Crime Victims was enacted in 2004. A variety of measures were implemented, achieving major improvements for victims of crime. On March 11, 2011, the Tohoku region was struck by a magnitude 9.0 earthquake, the largest ever recorded in Japanese history. The tsunami caused immense damage, and dedicated recovery efforts still continue today.
During the 30 years of the Heisei era from 1989, Japan suffered repeated disasters that caused unprecedented damage. As Japan faced various challenges in the area of criminal justice, the number of penal code offenses, including heinous and serious crimes, increased significantly at one stage. The Japanese government, the public and private sectors, and the communities all collaborated to implement crime prevention measures together with a variety of reforms in the field of criminal justice. Such initiatives, together with other contributing factors, led to a significant decrease in the number of penal code offenses that reached a post-war peak in 2002. The numbers decreased each year and reached a post-war low in 2018. Japan's criminal justice system guarantees basic individual rights and has operated properly under due process. Through such a sustained effort, Japan's crime rate is now one of the lowest in the world, and the country continues to maintain good public safety.
In 2017, the International Justice Center opened in Akishima City, Tokyo. The United Nations Asia and Far East Institute for the Prevention of Crime and the Treatment of Offenders, which is now located within that center, has conducted training courses and seminars for criminal justice practitioners since its establishment in 1962. Over 6,000 alumni from 139 countries and regions are actively serving in important positions worldwide. The center also houses the International Cooperation Department of the Research and Training Institute of the Ministry of Justice. Since its establishment in 2001, it has provided assistance for over 10 countries, mainly in Asia, including support for drafting laws and compiling legal textbooks in various fields of law. In 2021, the Crime Congress is taking place in Kyoto, half a century since the Fourth Congress. The main theme is advancing crime prevention, criminal justice, and the rule of law towards the achievement of the 2030 Agenda. The Olympic and Paralympic Games are taking place in Tokyo. And in 2025, the World Expo is being held in Osaka. Advanced computer technology and other innovation will make our life more convenient and bring the world much closer. On the other hand, it will facilitate new forms of crime and give rise to challenges which will require global responses. Japan has shared its experience and knowledge of criminal justice with the people of the world. Japan will continue to provide international cooperation and assistance to achieve a safe and secure society. We look forward to the discussions at this 14th UN Congress and the fruits they will bear.
1970年に開催された前回の京都コングレスから約50年にわたる日本の刑事司法の歩みを振り返ってまいりました。日本の刑事司法は社会経済情勢に応じて発展を遂げてきました。視点を現在に移すと、今私たちは新型コロナウイルス感染症による未曾有の危機に直面しています。世界中で弱い立場にある人々の命と生活が脅かされています。しかし私たちはその事実に目を向けているでしょうか。自分や自国のことばかりにとらわれていないでしょうか。このような時だからこそ SDGs に掲げられた誰一人取り残さない社会を実現するために、私たちはしっかりと歩みを進めていかなければなりません。京都コングレスでは世界の刑事司法のリーダーたちが2030年に向け SDGs の掲げる法の支配が浸透し、誰一人取り残さない社会を実現するための刑事司法の役割を話し合います。その実現は一国では成し遂げられない困難な課題です。
各国が互いに知恵を出し合い、学び合い、協力して取り組みを進めていかなければなりません。日本はホスト国として議論を牽引していきます。議論の中で日本の取り組みが一つの参考となれば幸いですし、私たちも他国の取り組みから学んでいきたいと思います。